Hello everyone, you are watching the third video in a Bible study video series. I'm Dine, and in this video we will cover Genesis chapter 3. Father, thank you for this time that we have to read your word. Thank you for all of the materials again that you've provided. Thank you for the people who are listening to this video. Please help us to be open to hear what you have to say and speak to us and tell us what you want us to hear. And let this be to your glory and use it according to your will. Amen. Before you watch the rest of this video, I wanted to quickly interrupt and tell you something that I realized after this video was compiled and after the audio was recorded. The KJV 2003 project is not the one who wrote the footnotes. All along I thought that they were the ones who added the footnotes, but actually the footnotes that I've been referencing actually come from the King James Version, which was published in the 1700s. So with that, I have gone back through this video and fixed the slides, but if there's any mention of the KJV 2003 project footnotes, just realize that I haven't edited the audio to omit that mistake. So with that, back to this video. Before we get into this section of Genesis, I want to point out that some people believe these accounts are symbolic for what actually happened, while others take it as a retelling of what did happen. As far as Adam being the first created human, Jesus, who all of you have probably heard of before, said that all the righteous blood spilt on the earth would come upon his generation of scribes and Pharisees, whom he was talking to. According to Matthew chapter 23, verse 35, while he was rebuking them, he said, "That upon you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of Abel the righteous, unto the blood of Zachariah son of Berechiah, whom ye, or in other words, their forefathers, slew between the sanctuary and the altar." In his words, Jesus shows that he believed Abel was a real person. So why is this significant? As we'll soon read, Abel was one of the sons of Adam, mentioned in Genesis by name. If Abel was a real person, it would make sense that we could trust that Adam was a real person too. I also want to point out that the Babylonians, as mentioned in Haley's Bible Handbook by Henry H. Haley, published in 1992, had one or more stories that are in some ways similar to this account in Genesis. One of these stories mentions a man who was immortal, but somehow became mortal because of knowledge. There have also been archaeological discoveries of Babylonian artifacts which mention a snake and a life tree. M.G. Easton said in the third edition of his Illustrated Bible Dictionary, quote, "On the monuments of Egypt are found representations of a deity in human form, piercing with a spear the head of a serpent. This is regarded as an illustration of the wide dissemination of the tradition of the fall, the story of the Golden Age, which gives place to the Iron Age, the age of purity and innocence, which is followed by a time when man becomes a prey to sin and misery, as represented in the mythology of Greece and Rome, has also been regarded as a tradition of the fall." Unquote. M.G. Easton and Henry H. Haley both seem to have agreed that many cultures have stories related to Genesis' account of the events in Eden. Mr. Easton said elsewhere in his dictionary, quote, "Among almost all nations there are traditions of the primitive innocence of our race in the Garden of Eden. This was the Golden Age to which the Greeks looked back. Men then lived a, quote, life free from sin, from care, and without labor and sorrow. Old age was unknown. The body never lost its vigor. Existence was a perpetual feast without a taint of evil. The earth brought forth spontaneously all things that were good in profuse abundance." Unquote. I don't know that I can prove that every account in Genesis actually happened the way that it says it did. But I still believe that it did. Or they did. Easton's dictionary was published a long time ago, and so I'm sure that new discoveries and theories have come around since then. But, like Mr. Haley and Mr. Easton might have said, I suggest that maybe there were myths from other cultures similar to Genesis' account, not because Genesis is a refabrication of older stories, but instead because the account of the fall of man in Genesis is history. So with that, let's get into Genesis chapter 3. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which Jehovah God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of any tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, Of the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat. But of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as God, knowing good and evil. The fact that a snake is speaking in these verses probably stands out in your mind. Obviously, the people who don't believe this account is literal probably don't feel that they need to explain this talking snake. But those who treat it more literal probably do. I'll treat these verses as literal and go over some possible explanations. Some may say, including Jehovah's Witnesses, that Satan, an angel that rebelled against God, spoke as if the snake was speaking, even though the snake actually couldn't speak, and by using the snake as a prop, deceived the woman. Some may say that Satan made himself look like a snake and spoke to the woman. Some may say that Satan controlled the snake. This could also be called demon possession. Finally, others may say that snakes could talk at this point in time, and other animals could also possibly talk. Now I should probably point out that the fact that the woman, Eve, replied to the snake does not necessarily imply a speaking snake was normal. As far as what I think the snake was, I think the snake may have been Satan in disguise, or possibly the snake was just a snake that could talk, but was used by Satan, like humans can be, to accomplish his will. And by that I don't mean demon possession. In verse 1, the word subtle can also mean crafty. The word beast is the same general Hebrew word used in Genesis chapter 1 verse 24. It can generally be translated as some living and or wild creature. The word field should probably be translated here as land. According to the American Standard Version footnotes, where it says, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of any tree of the garden, it could also be translated as, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of all the trees of the garden? When Eve says that God said they couldn't touch the fruit or they would die, that may just be her adding on to God's own commands. According to Genesis chapter 2, verses 16 through 17, God commanded the man not to eat of the tree, but he does not mention touching it. It's very possible that the woman only knew about the command because the man told her, since it specifically says God told the man. And the woman wasn't formed yet when God gave the command. It's also possible that she made it even more strict in her own mind to help her keep from breaking what God actually commanded. This may be why Eve said she couldn't even touch it, even though that probably wasn't true. Obviously, the serpent planned this event beforehand, and knew generally what the woman's response would be. He asked what God had said so that he could put doubt in the woman's mind. In essence, what the snake was saying to the woman was that God was withholding something good from her, even though in reality God had given her and her husband everything they could want. Verse 6 continues, "And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat. And she gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together, and made themselves aprons. And they heard the voice of Jehovah God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And the man and his wife did hide themselves from the presence of Jehovah God amongst the trees of the garden." Now, notice in verse 6 that while Adam was with Eve, the snake talked to Eve, not Adam. Also, Eve made her own decision to eat the fruit, and then Adam followed after her example. If it's true that the man is supposed to lead the family, then this verse shows disorder compared to God's design. Although the Hebrew word is translated as new, it has a connection to the idea of seeing. An example of this in English would probably be, "I know because I see for myself." There could be a play on words in Hebrew here, since earlier in this verse it says, "The eyes of them both were opened." According to Strong's Hebrew Dictionary, the word translated as aprons is connected to something that wraps around the waist. Strong suggests a belt. The word translated as sewed seems to have been literally translated, based on what Strong says in his dictionary. As far as the aprons, my guess is they may have been similar to loincloths. I don't know what it means by sewing leaves together, though, unless it means intertwining them. For verse 8, Young's literal translation says this, "And they hear the sound of Jehovah God walking up and down in the garden at the breeze of the day. And the man and his wife hide themselves from the face of Jehovah God in the midst of the trees of the garden." Verse 9 continues, "And Jehovah God called unto the man, and said unto him, Where art thou? And he said, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself." And then verse 11 continues into the next paragraph, "And he said, Who told thee that thou wast naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree, whereof I commanded thee that thou shouldest not eat? And the man said, The woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat. And Jehovah God said unto the woman, What is this thou hast done? And the woman said, The serpent beguiled me, and I did eat." For verse 9, I don't know if this is true or not, but I wonder if in Hebrew this verse suggests that God first called Adam to attention and then asked him where he was. Obviously, if Adam was scared and hiding, he probably wouldn't come out of hiding unless he was found. If it's true that God called Adam and then asked him where he was, then, somewhat like I've heard James L. Nicodeme say before, God must not have been asking where Adam was standing, or in this case hiding, but asking him what state he was in to make him think. Notice that God calls Adam specifically, not Eve. This suggests, but does not prove, that even in the beginning man and woman had different roles, and that there was some sort of order in marriage. Of course, with that in mind, I should also mention that back in Genesis chapter 2 verse 18, God said that he would make Adam a help meet for him, and that, based on the information in the same verse, verse 18, man and woman both seem to have been designed to live and work together, even though man was created before the woman was formed. It's in our DNA. For verse 10, the word translated here as voice is the same word translated in verse 8 as voice. In verse 13, the Hebrew word translated as beguiled can mean to delude the mind, but another possible meaning is to seduce. Notice that both the man and the woman's excuses attempt to shift the blame in verses 12 through 13, but don't quite work. Adam was with Eve when she ate the fruit. See verse 6. And whether she gave him the fruit or not, he was still the one who ate it. While Eve was tricked into believing that God lied, and that it would be beneficial to disobey him, apparently so was Adam, or he probably wouldn't have followed along, she wasn't tricked into thinking that somehow her actions wouldn't be in disobedience to God. Both of them tried to get out of the blame, but neither of them lied to God. Verse 14 continues, And Jehovah God said unto the serpent, Because thou hast done this, cursed art thou above all cattle, and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. He shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. In verse 14, the word cursed could have been translated as utterly hated. In verse 15, according to Strong, the word translated as bruise twice literally means, quote, to gape, unquote, at, or snap at. It can also simply mean to bruise, and maybe just to harm in general. Christians usually equate this verse, 15, with the first promise of a Savior. But I believe most Jews just view it as God's cursing the snake with a common hatred between snakes and men. I think the difference in views is because of the different views of the snake. If the snake is Satan or possessed by Satan, maybe the offspring of the snake could be symbolic of the death that the snake's trickery brought. On the other hand, if the snake was just a snake, yet being a symbol of Satan, then the common Jewish view is right. Verse 16 says, Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy pain in thy conception. In pain thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. Verse 17 continues in the next paragraph, And unto Adam he said, Because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree, of which I commanded thee, saying, Thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. In toil shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground. For out of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. In verse 16, the word translated as pain literally means worrisomeness, but can also mean, quote, labor or pain. According to Strong's Hebrew Dictionary, the word translated as conception comes from a word that means, quote, to be or become pregnant. He says that this word in verse 16 means pregnancy. The second Hebrew word translated as pain usually meant painfully hard work. The word translated as rule is literally translated according to Strong's Hebrew Dictionary, but it could also generally mean to, quote, have power, unquote, over someone. The KJV 2003 Project Footnotes suggest this translation, And thy desire shall be subject to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. Young translates this verse, 16, as, Unto the woman he said, Multiplying I multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow dost thou bear children, and toward thy husband is thy desire, and he doth rule over thee. I've read in several places, and I've heard, that the Hebrew words translated as, quote, Thy desire shall be to thy husband, unquote, may, or may not, show a malicious intent. In verse 17, the word translated as hearkened means, quote, to hear intelligently, but can be connected to the idea of obedience. This word is also used in cases where the meaning listen is meant without the idea of submission. The word translated as cursed is the same Hebrew word God used when he cursed the snake. In verse 17, the word translated as sorrow is the same word translated in verse 16 as pain. The first word, not the second. In verse 18, the word translated as bring forth means to sprout. The word translated as herb can be used for grass, herbs, or possibly just green things in general. According to Strong, the word translated as bread means, quote, food for man or beast, especially bread or grain for making it, unquote. Because the word translated as herb can mean grass, and the word translated as bread can mean bread or grain, I think in this situation God was referring specifically to grains. I think that in some ways the man and the woman's curse were specific to them, but in other ways they are general to mankind. For example, the man was forced to work hard in order to eat grain, but after his death, mankind was allowed to eat meat, which isn't always as hard to acquire. Of course, it is still hard to grow things today, and in that way, mankind shares the same curse that Adam was given. If you're wondering why I said what I said about meat, you'll have to wait until we go over the account of the flood, which is later in Genesis. Getting back to God's mentioning of Adam eating grain in verses 17 through 18, I want to say that this contradicts the idea that originally man had to eat animals and things that grew wild because he didn't know how to grow things himself. I'm going to point out the obvious here and say that one of Adam's main jobs was to take care of the garden. So from the very beginning, he was a gardener. Continuing on in verse 20, and the man called his wife's name Eve, because she was the mother of all living. Verse 21 continues in the next paragraph, and Jehovah God made for Adam and for his wife coats of skins and clothed them. Verse 22 is another paragraph, and Jehovah God said, behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat, and live forever. Therefore Jehovah God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden, to till the ground from whence he was taken. So he drove out the man, and he placed out at the east of the Garden of Eden the cherubim, and the flame of a sword which turned every way, to keep the way of the tree of life. For verse 20, according to the footnotes for the Holy Scriptures, published by the Jewish Publication Society, Eve's name means life. I wonder why this little paragraph, which is just verse 20, is in this location instead of somewhere else in the chapter. Maybe God in verses 15 through 16 made Adam realize that his wife would be the, quote, mother of all living. Or was God implying that there would be deliverance and Adam picked up on it somehow? In verse 21, the word translated as coats is, according to Strong's Hebrew Dictionary, connected to the idea of covering, and could also be translated generally as garment. I think Rabbi Danoon has said before that he thinks the animals these skins came from were goats. If that's true, then maybe, as Rabbi Danoon also said, this was the first sacrifice to cover man's sin. Young translates verse 22 this way, and Jehovah God saith, Lo, the man was as one of us, as to the knowledge of good and evil. And now, lest he send forth his hand, and have taken also of the tree of life, and eaten, and lived to the age. Notice that God placed the cherubim, which is plural of cherub, at the east, or possibly the front of the Garden of Eden. But the, quote, flame of a sword which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life, unquote, doesn't seem to have been wielded by the cherubim. Alright everyone, that is the end of this third video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that these videos continue to get better. Thank you for watching.